Hello, friends, and welcome to season 2 of Friendly Show. Ta-da-da-da-dum!
Woo!
So today we're having a special guest. It is Steven Memmenheim or
Margheim. Margheim, man.
Margheim.
Come on.
Yeah, and basically, I know Steven from Twitter as the SQLite guy. So I keep reading your tweets over the months, and I'm just getting more and more convinced that we should just dump Postgres on MySQL, and SQLite is the future. There are so many new features. So yeah, we're going to talk to Steven today, and actually, I had this wonderful chance to meet Steven. Well, we both with Adrian did. So we met Steven live in was it Bern? Yeah, at
In
Helvetic Ruby.
Bern. Yep. And at Rails World as well.
Yeah, and
Beer
so
Temple. He was one of the Beer Temple guys, the crew.
Praying at the temple.
Yeah.
yeah, so Steven, it's really nice to have you here with us.
Cool. So, you're an American expat living in Berlin with his wife and their two dogs. You're like a contributor to Rails and the SQLite 3 Ruby gem, as well as maintainer of a handful of gems aimed at making Ruby on Rails the absolute best, platforms in the world to run SQLite projects. Okay, so do you want to start a little bit of telling us where do you work and how did you end up in Berlin?
Yeah, I work for a company here in Berlin called Test.io. We offer crowd-driven testing services to companies, and I am the engineering manager there.
Okay.
So I'm not doing development work as my primary day-to-day responsibilities, but one of my responsibilities is being effectively one half of the research and development team at the company. So the CTO and I do nearly all of the sort of initial experimental projects to see, is there something here? Do we need to build like a small one-off application for a larger customer? Are we expanding into a new market and want to see if it has legs and is viable? And it was through that I started using SQLite in production because I needed to be able to build an application quickly, and Rails is quite good at that. But what I found over time was that even more importantly, I needed to be able to maintain that application with really small windows of time between calls. So it's like if I have 30 minutes between the end of one call and the start of another call, I need to be able to read the bug report, go into the production application, figure out where the problem is happening, figure out how to solve the problem, implement the solution, deploy the solution, go into production, check that the solution actually solves the problem, and then write the person that reported it, hey, it's been fixed. And I have like these 30-minute windows to do all of that. And I found that the more tools, the more indirection that I had in the applications, the more difficult it was to work with these applications in that kind of way. And I initially just started off like just running Rails defaults and pushing it to a Hatchbox server and seeing what it was like. And almost immediately, it was a noticeable difference. Like even just the simple thing of like SCPing the production database down to my laptop and being able to debug in my local instance of the application, so totally sandbox, but with all of the production data and like step through the problems. And yeah, that's been maybe I deployed the first Rails application into production here at work a little bit over a year ago, and the more I used it, the more I was like, this is incredibly productive for me in these constraints. And so I just started trying to polish the rough edges that I came across as I went deeper into building and maintaining these applications.
Nice. So basically you're trying to stay as lean as possible and do as much as you can in the shortest amount of time. Gotcha. Tell us a little bit about the rough edges. What's stopping people? I mean, what's not enough when running, Rails new and using SQLite? What's missing there?
Yeah. Well, luckily, I can give you some different answers for like what was missing when I first started
Okay.
versus what is missing now, because there has been a lot of progress, and that's exciting to see. Like early on, it was sort of just running into these brick walls of knowing of these Rails features from working with Rails applications using Postgres. And then going to use them. So whether it's like generated columns, that was like one of the very first ones that I hit. And looking at the SQLite documentation and seeing SQLite supports this and Rails supports this, but the SQLite adapter in Rails doesn't tie these two wires together.
Okay.
And there were a small handful of features like that were honest, just like just copy and paste the Postgres adapter code almost. So I did a number of pull requests like that at first, just to wire up these features that had been neglected from the SQLite adapter. But today, I think that the biggest rough edge is that SQLite has a database level write lock, so not row level or table level. Like only one query can be writing to the database at a time.
Okay.
And a lot of people presume that this means you can never have like production grade applications backed with SQLite, which isn't really true. Like just back of the napkin math, roughly, like when you move from queries taking milliseconds to queries taking microseconds, you can pack at least 100 of these queries in the same amount of time it took you to do another one. So linearizing them does not harm you a lot. But you do have to contend with getting locked or busy exceptions in your standard Rails application, because you are going to spin up multiple threads by default in production, and they're going to have multiple connections. But there are pull requests that are open and being evaluated and making their way into main and then eventually into new versions of Rails that will resolve that rough edge.
Okay.
But it's still there. That's probably the most frequent one, and you're guaranteed to see those exceptions in your bug tracker when you put a SQLite application today into production.
Okay. So I'm not a super big, database buff. I don't know a lot of the internals, but what this sounds to me is like what Postgres, and every database had when serverless came around. When, you could have a service, something on Lambda that was spinning up like maybe 100 or 200 clients at once, because you have this surge of customers, of users, and then they would all connect to your same database, which usually, it will take like a few connections, 5, 10, whatever, 20, but now they have hundreds all at once. And there were these solutions, like one of them is PG Bouncer, which is basically a manager of connections, and you send all the connections to the PG Bouncer, and PG Bouncer connects to the Postgres and whatever. I don't know a lot of the internals, but what it seems to me like this is something that we need. Some kind of, I think it's called like a stopcock. Some just one place where you can connect, and it will figure out when to write, when to whatever. But maybe I don't have that much, of deep understanding, but having something like this, like, somebody said, okay, it's okay, just put on PG Bouncer and you're good. You're going to be good. You're not going to feel the difference. This is something that I would, like to hear for SQLite. Like, hey, just use this and everything is covered. It will retry whatever it needs to retry, or handle the connections or the writes or whatever. Is this something, at the Rails level that should be added, or like is there like to the SQLite Ruby gem? How do you see that?
Yeah, so I think that the simplest place to like have that, like the buck stops here and this is where we're going to figure out the linear order of operations, is SQLite itself. Like it has everything to handle that itself. The problem, there's two key problems that exist today. One exists in the SQLite 3 Ruby gem, and one exists in Rails. So
Okay.
the SQLite 3 Ruby gem is, SQLite exposes a C interface. And so if you want to hook into it and work with its various hooks, you can only do that in C. So the core of the SQLite 3 Ruby gem is writing a lot of C code to connect it into Ruby code and to allow you to interact with the SQLite interface through Ruby. SQLite has native support for retrying busy connections, right? So you have two concurrent connections that are both trying to write. The first one that gets in, starts to write, acquires the database lock. The second one goes, sees that there's a lock, and you can set up how you want that retry mechanism to work. The default most common use case is to just set up a timeout. So it's going to not quite exponentially, like logarithmically sleep and retry up to however many milliseconds you say.
Okay.
And when you set the timeout parameter in your database YAML file in Rails, that's what it is wiring up.
Okay.
The problem is that the SQLite 3 Ruby gem tells the C code in SQLite, hey, there's a timeout for 5 seconds. So you have a busy connection, and it's like, let me run this timeout logic, retry, sleep, retry. That happens in SQLite's code in C. And the SQLite 3 Ruby gem does not instrument that code in such a way as to release the GVL in Ruby.
Okay.
So SQLite is sleeping and retrying, but it is holding the Ruby's global VM lock, and so no other code is able to run. So SQLite allows you to do concurrency, but the Ruby interface doesn't connect with that. So I wrote a pull request to the SQLite 3 Ruby gem to implement a non-blocking timeout, right? So you follow the same logic, sleep, retry up to a certain amount of time, but during each of those sleeps, we release Ruby's VM lock. And once a new version of the SQLite 3 Ruby gem gets tagged, I'll open a pull request into Rails and wire up the database YAML timeout configuration option to this new non-blocking retry. Gotcha. So that's like one problem, but it's being solved. It will be solved. The second problem in Rails is that it doesn't currently work with SQLite's transactions in the most intelligent way. So SQLite has a somewhat novel concept of transaction modes. So by default, transactions are what's called deferrable, which means that they don't acquire SQLite's database lock. They presume maybe you're just doing a pure read-only transaction, and in that case, no need to acquire the lock. So we're going to presume that you won't do a write until you start to do a write inside of that transaction, and at that point, we'll try to acquire the lock. But because you're inside of a transaction, and SQLite is very aggressive about its isolation guarantees, if you try to acquire the write lock inside of a deferrable transaction and another connection has the write lock, it won't go through the retry mechanism. It immediately errors. SQLite will just instantaneously throw an exception because it can't guarantee if it retries the state of the initial reads or what happened before.
Yeah.
There is another mode for transactions called immediate mode, which says I want to immediately, when I'm starting the transaction, acquire the write lock. And if another connection has the write lock, it'll enter into this retry mechanism and sleep, retry. So I have a pull request open right now for Rails to ensure that all of the transactions that Rails wraps write operations from Active Record in are immediate transactions. And so when these two features come together and are in Rails, what will be the case is that we will push the responsibility to SQLite to figure out the linear order of write operations as we concurrently send them in. It will have however much time you set in your timeout for each operation to get executed. And the default is 5 seconds. That is very sane, and you're very unlikely to see any exceptions unless you really have like a problem with your database. And I've monkey patched things in my own application to get these fixes in there, and the exceptions have I have not seen a database locked or database busy exception since implementing those changes. So I think we're going to get to that place by Rails 8.
Nice.
So I'm kind of under the impression that you can try using SQLite in production now, but it's better to wait for like a year or so until it is really ready.
Yeah, well, it depends. So I specifically built and released a gem called the Active Record Enhanced SQLite 3 Adapter. A really beautiful name.
Yes,
I'm very creative. To backport these features because, Rails releases can be slow. And sometimes you can't quickly upgrade to the new Rails version, but you still want these features. So whether it's generated column support, whether it's a non-blocking SQLite retry mechanism, whether it is immediate transactions, right? If you install the gem, it automatically enhances the SQLite 3 adapter, patches these changes in, and you'll get there. So the goal is to make the default Rails experience for everyone. You don't have to know about this gem. You don't have to know to install it. Excellent. And probably it will take through the end of 2024 to get everything in default Rails. But you can get all of these things today if you do Rails new and then bundle add, Active Record Enhanced SQLite 3 adapter.
You should, we'll talk after, but I'll show you how you can create a template for that, and it'll be a little bit easier. But yeah, definitely a good path forward. It's a little bit deeper than what I understand about. I understood what you said, but more, I'm not super passionate. I feel that you're super passionate about it, and I think this is what we need. You're the SQLite guy. You're PRing improvements to the SQLite driver to Rails. Okay, you can take care of that thing, and I'm personally I'm super happy that there is such a person. I remember when we met the last time at Helvetic. I asked you hey, I would love to see how you do some of the I would say common things that you do with Postgres, or we are used to doing with Postgres, backups or restores or logging or other things. How would you do those with SQLite? And you told me about the Litestack, and I think SQLite, this is something else. Tell us what are these two? What are the Litestack and SQLite? How do they work into our current workflow? How
just
do they
before we
help?
jump into it, I think Julian Rubish has been releasing a series of blog posts about Litestack. I think there are 5 of them. I haven't read them yet, but maybe after Steven explains, it'll be easier to digest them.
Yeah, those are on the AppSignal blog, and they're excellent. I would highly recommend them. So yeah, let's start talking about the emerging larger Ruby and SQLite ecosystem. So Litestack was honestly the light bulb moment for me that activated my passion, because I had been running a couple of Rails applications in production at work with SQLite and was enjoying the developer experience, but I hadn't pushed very hard. And it's when I hit rough edges, it's okay, just, avoid that corner, avoid that edge. But I came across the Litestack gem on Twitter, and I went to the GitHub repository. I read the README, and it was genuinely one of those lightning strikes, light bulb switches on. I had a epiphany. I had simply lacked the imagination to consider the possibility that Rails has only a handful of IO-bound components that need some sort of data persistence to some degree. And SQLite, being an embedded database, could be architected in such a way to be the backend for all of them. So you want a cache backend? Here's a SQLite database. You want your PubSub server for Action Cable? Here's a SQLite database. You want your database for Active Record? Here's a SQLite database. You want your job queue? Here's a SQLite database.
That sounds like a lot of SQLite databases.
Yeah, well, it's 4, but they're just files, and they, for most of them, the data is not persisted for all time. They don't grow to infinity. Yeah. But sure, it's a lot of SQLite databases, but SQLite databases are basically the simplest, cheapest kind of database you could possibly have. So I saw that, and it opened my eyes to the possibility. And I had already been attracted to this core principle of simplifying the number of moving parts, simplifying the number of tools, right? To make this maintainability as quick and seamless as possible. And so I just was immediately like, wow, this is the future. For this kind, for the kind of apps that I'm writing, in the kinds of constraints that I have, this is 100% going to make my life much better. And so I got connected with Muhammad A. Ali, Old Mo on Twitter and GitHub, who created that project, and just started chatting with him and asking him a bunch of questions as I was reading the code. And what I started to realize was that there was a lot of wisdom in his code that was generally applicable. And so I found myself basically just becoming the John the Baptist to his Jesus, right? Okay, you have this wisdom. Let me learn it, understand it, and find ways to apply it. But that's the Litestack project. It's basically, what if SQLite files backed all of your data needs for a Rails application?
Yeah.
And the ExtraLite project, just to really quickly cover it, is also really exciting. And I personally use it often. And I'm working on putting just a little shim layer to allow Rails applications to use it as their active record driver. But it is an alternative SQLite driver. That is to say, it writes C code to expose SQLite's C interface into Ruby. The biggest key difference between ExtraLite and the SQLite 3 Ruby gem is that the ExtraLite driver was built from day one to ensure that Ruby's global VM lock is released whenever SQLite is doing work that's going to take more than a couple microseconds.
Okay.
And so it allows for concurrency in a way that the SQLite 3 Ruby gem doesn't. By default, the SQLite 3 Ruby gem is going to hold the GVL, and ExtraLite is going to release it. So it just plays with concurrency better. And that's a project by Sharon Rosner, who is a pretty well-known Ruby dev. If you've poked into some of the not Rails sides of Ruby, he's amazing. And there's been a lot of activity lately. He's been adding a lot of really cool features. And that's another example where I just go and read his code and get inspired and try to just bring that back to the larger ecosystem. But yeah, both of those are really vibrant, awesome, exciting, and inspiring projects in the emerging Ruby SQLite ecosystem.
Nice.
But what's actually the point of using SQLite? I imagined so that at some point of time, Heroku removed the possibility of having a free Postgres database. And that's the approximate time when I started hearing about like SQLite. I guess like it's cheaper, and from what you are doing, like you launch a lot of tiny projects to like demo or something. So I guess like it's use SQLite for quickly prototyping and launching into production without like having to pay for a Postgres database. So I have the impression that like you would use SQLite to decrease costs, like not pay for a Postgres, but just like pay for S3 storage for SQLite files.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the reasons, but there are others. So let me list some of them. And also, not to like chastise you or anything, but just because I think it is an important piece of nuance. Because another part of the myth, I think, is that like SQLite can handle tiny things, but if you've got a real size thing, you need a real database. And I have one of the applications, the very first one that I built. It's the oldest. I mean, we're doing millions of dollars in revenue through that application. It is used by companies whose name everyone knows. I mean, it's real, you know. But so just to say, like the scale thing, there's a lot of myths there. But cost is certainly one. I think related to cost, but for me, far more important, is reducing the number of moving pieces and reducing the number of actual servers that need to be up for the application to be running. So this is sort of like an inversion of the standard logic for high availability. It's like, hey, if you want high availability, you need to have 3 instances of everything that you're doing, because 1 is none and 2 is 1. And yeah, there is some logic to that. But when you have an application, and in order for it to be running smoothly, the application server needs to be up and running, the Postgres server needs to be up and running, and the Redis server needs to be up and running. If any one of those 3 servers goes down, your whole application goes down, and
multiple
the
points
surface
of
area
failure.
there is larger. Yeah.
But
the other one that honestly drives a lot of my like passion in the open source world is that I think that it is important for Rails to really be more aggressive about lowering the conceptual barrier to entry for new developers to get applications onto the internet. And I think it's specifically important right now because I think that that has been one of the major advantages for the front-end JavaScript world for like the last decade. They did a really good job of marketing this idea that you could just write a little bit of code, sign up for the free tier of 15 different SaaSes, and get an application onto the internet. And there is no better hook for a new developer than having an actual URL for their application. Like getting it running on your laptop is cool, but when you can send your mom the URL, like that's amazing, electric. And I think that it's easy for Rails developers in particular because it's so mature and so many of us are mature developers who've been working in web development for over a decade to underappreciate like the actual conceptual complexity of like these guides, like even just Kamal, right? It's like, hey, it makes it super simple. All you need to do is understand containerization. All you need to do is understand what traffic is and what a reverse proxy is and how it's a load balancer. And there's like 18 different bits of jargon that if you don't understand them, they're going to take you months. And then even the simpler ones, it's like, okay, let's build an application well. Well, all that is going to require is 1 server that's a load balancer, 3 servers for your application. You're going to need 1 Postgres server, but you want it to be highly available. So you want to have 2 different replicas. Here's how you're going to set up your replica mesh. Now, obviously, you're also going to want Redis for your job queue, but you're going to want a different retention policy for that Redis than the Redis for your cache. And here's how retention policies work. And you're going to have those 2 servers, but obviously you want high availability. So you want a replica of each of those servers. And then all of a sudden, it's like you have a network topology of 10 servers. And that is, I'm not saying that that's a bad way to deploy applications. That's a great way to deploy applications when you have those needs. But if that's the story that we are presenting to people for here's how you get an application on the internet that's like good and solid and like legit, not like, hey, here's my little toy demo and it's just Rails scaffolding. I just don't think it is approachable. And React has started to become unapproachable. So let's take the opportunity to make Rails really approachable and to say, like, this isn't a toy. This isn't for tiny applications. This isn't for demos. Like, you can run millions of dollars of business on a single machine.
Yep.
You can make it highly resilient. You can debug problems in 5 minutes, and you only have to really learn 2 tools, right? Like, I barely know Docker. I know Rails and I know SQLite, and I am incredibly productive. And I know almost nothing else, a kind of a 2-trick pony, but it's possible. So I think those are 3 interrelated reasons, but cost is not, in my mind, the biggest one, but it's a nice perk, I would say.
Yep. I was just thinking when you were doing all that description about the map of servers and you ended up at, okay, you need 10 servers. And in my mind, all it was, and I only have 10 customers right now. So yeah, I think this whole thing, I think it's a thing that us engineers are doing, over-engineering our expectations as well. Like, I need a real database because I'm going to build a real, app, a real product that is going to have like millions of customers, right? And I cannot toy around with SQLite, and that's why, like, that's what you're hearing from, senior developers, people that are really building at scale, right? Maybe they have different needs, who knows? And I think that for a junior developer or somebody that's starting out, you're kind of afraid of like going, like, I'll say down on the SQLite path, or the things that are not real, even though they actually know that they're going to have 10 customers in the end, for the first year or 2 or whatever. So yeah, it's a thing of managing the expectations and how we talk to people, and we should be a little bit less strict about, yes, this is the only way to do it, like you said, like load balancers and multiple services and yada yada yada. We should be a little bit less strict about that, and make it more approachable and make it fun a little bit. Like, so what the hell? We started with PHP and FTP. Like, I did that, and it was all good.
Yeah, so around 2015, when I was just learning Ruby on Rails, it was common you would like have SQLite in the development group in the gem file, and you would have like Heroku 12 factor and or something like that, and gem Postgres in the production group, and like in the database YML you would have like in the development you used SQLite, and in production you would use Postgres. And I remember I really burned my fingers at some point of time when I was like doing development in SQLite. Then I tried to deploy it to production, and the app crashes because like the schema or the like queries that I was doing in that were compatible with the SQLite database were not compatible with the Postgres database. So I kind of spent a while on that, and since then, always when I created like Rails new, I used to type Rails new database equals Postgres.
Yeah, I hit those same problems myself. I remember the first time, and this has actually been changed recently, but I had a whole bunch of queries that were using the double equals operator. So I had some string SQL, and I was using double equals to check equality. And I mean, this was years ago. I can't even remember why. I guess I was running the tests against SQLite. It must have been that. And everything was failing. I could not figure out what was going on. And it's like, at the time, SQLite only supported single equal sign for equality checks.
Okay, yeah, I remember.
And I was like, that just looks ugly. I don't want to do it. It looks like assignment. It doesn't look like a Boolean check. yeah, and those kinds of gaps, and even like just the gaps where like the Rails adapter doesn't implement a feature for one database when it could, can get frustrating for sure.
Talking of Litestack, so there is this repository Ruby video for the website rubyvideo.dev maintained by Adrian Polly, and it's running on Litestack. So I was actually exploring the code base, and it's quite interesting to see like Litestack gem installed and being actually used. I will leave a link in the description.
I want to do a SQLite directory similar to Gemfile directory or Kamal directory to have a place for us to, as a community of web developers using SQLite, to like build a repository of proof that yes, it is production ready because it's being run in production and has been for years.
Cool.
And then I'm also working to just like collect. There is a decent amount of smart thinking on how to use SQLite in the context of a web application, but there's not a ton of it, and it's very dispersed. It's dispersed across time. You know, you'll find like, I have found some like really excellent stuff from like 2010.
Okay.
And it's dispersed around the internet. So I'm starting a curation project to just like gather as much and have a centralized place to get as much of the good content.
I saw a tweet from you that you started working on SQLite directory. Tell us what's that? What are you building there, and how can people help?
Yeah, so this is a project directly inspired by Josh Pickford's Gemfile directory, which was him building an idea from Rob Zulkas, I think, to just have a place on the internet for people to submit. Here is an actual, real web application that is running in production, and it's using SQLite. And as a community of web developers using SQLite, we can build up this directory of demonstrable proof that SQLite is in fact production ready because it is being run in production. And I'm specifically wanting to allow people to provide a little bit more information if they want, optionally, about how they're running it. So like, how many CPUs are you running it on? How much RAM do you have? What's your disk size? What host are you running it on? Do you know information about your max request per second or your average request per second? To just help build a clearer sense that a lot of these myths that like, okay, sure, if you only have 10 requests per second, sure, I guess you could use SQLite. And it's like, no, I mean, DHH was just tweeting about it. They have a machine, one of their beefy machines from their cloud exit, and they put their new once product Campfire on it and load tested it and hit 50,000 concurrent requests. So slightly more than 10. So yeah, that is just a project for the community to start to build out a collection of applications that are actually using SQLite in whatever ways they are, so that we can aggregate like, this is real. Like, this is, I worry sometimes that people start to think that these things that start to have a bit of hype on the internet are just being driven by the inertia of the hype, and it's all smoke. So just to like ground it and say, hey, I'm not talking about this because I'm selling anything, because I'm trying to make money. Like, I run multiple applications at work on SQLite, and I've really enjoyed the different developer experience that it has unlocked for me. I think that other people might want or need that developer experience, and I have the opportunity to take the time to help push this niche inside of the Rails community forward. So yeah, that project is just this hope that we can build a large enough collection of real applications running SQLite with enough detail to just put to bed this myth that it's for toy projects, it's for tiny projects, it's
Well,
all theoretical, so
actually,
forth and so on.
SQLite directory sounds not just contained to like Ruby world, but like it can be not Ruby applications, but all kinds of applications running
Yeah.
SQLite. And also, like you mentioned, like SQLite directory, and you mentioned like Gemfile directory and Dropzolkus's Turbo Native directory. I'm just seeing a trend here. Like there should be lots of like directories popping up, like this directory, that directory. I'm sure one of the next weeks there will be like HTMX directory.
Yeah.
We should check whether the domain is not taken.
I'm trying to take directory right now. I'm on
Ooh.
my. It's unavailable. God damn it.
Yeah.
Well,
I genuinely hope that if you visit it, it just redirects you to yahoo.com.
Yeah, let me do that right now. Cool. So, like, people know you as the SQLite guy. Why is that, and why? How can other people be the guy of anything? It's an off-topic question, or whatever comes to mind. How can other people be the guy?
Yeah, that I actually really love that question because it both happened accidentally and on purpose. So let me unpack both halves of that. The accidental half is that I just sort of somewhat accidentally started. I just experimented to see what would it be like to run an application with SQLite. Would it help me out given the constraints I had? And I enjoyed it. And so I did the next one and the next one. And I hit a few rough edges and wrote some monkey patches in my applications and continued on. But it became intentional after I watched the Laracon talk by Aaron Francis on creating your own luck. And he described sort of his journey, and it started off similar to mine, right? It's like I have been doing Ruby on Rails development for almost, I guess, maybe 10 years now, and have benefited so much from the community and from the people who are active and present and energetic in the community. But I've always been very much like a voyeur, very passive and just sort of leeching from the community. But I can confess, as he also confessed, like I always thought like, but I'm good. Like I'm good at this. I feel confident that I'm at least just better than average and good enough that I could do something of value. I could theoretically give value back to the community, but like what and where and how and how do I not get wrapped up in my own ego and just, it's like, I don't know how to do it. I just never really pursued it. But I had started to enjoy this different sort of experience running these applications at work with SQLite. And I saw his talk, and around the same time, I came across the Litestack project. And I was like, okay, I want to really explore this and see if I can make this work. But I wanted to try to do it without installing a gem, because that's another part of like the aggressive simplicity of these R&D projects is like as few gems as possible. And yeah, so I just started to like push into it, and I just sort of told myself, you know what, like, let's just try some things out. And there was a really critical moment. I just started writing. I resurrected my blog and I started publishing, and I was in a really energetic mood. So I was like publishing every day. And after like maybe 5 days or something, I had gotten some feedback on Twitter, and I had written a post about how to configure a SQLite database to better fit the context of a web application. And I got some tweets back on oh yeah, you can also tweak some compilation settings, and that can help a few things. I was like, oh, that's cool. So I started experimenting with, how could you configure the compilation flags for SQLite in your Rails application? And I couldn't quite figure it out. And I opened an issue on the SQLite 3 Ruby repository, and one of the maintainers there, Mike DeLisio, was like, hey, or I framed it initially as, here's a bug. I'm trying to do this and it's not working, and it's a problem with the SQLite 3 Ruby gem. Fix it. And he was like, hey, I don't quite understand the problem, but maybe we could hop on a call and I could, pair with you and see what's going on. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I'm free. So he just hops on a call with me. We dig into it. We talk. Through talking, he helps me understand that the thing I'm trying to do, I shouldn't try to do it in this way, which is hard. I should do it in this way, which is easy. And all he has to do is make one change to the SQLite 3 Ruby gem, and then it'll be easy and everything will work. And I'm like, that's awesome. And he makes the change and pushes a new release. And in that interaction, like how open and easy and encouraging he was, it just sort of pushed me over the top. I had this momentum. I was like, you know what? I need to give. I need to stop taking and I need to give. Yeah. And so I started, and I opened a couple pull requests to Rails to just implement some of these missing features. And he pinged some Shopify developers to have them actually review it, so it wasn't one of the 300 PRs that never even gets read. No shade, just a description. And from there, you just get a little bit of confidence, and it allows you to keep going. I want to pull out from that story, I think 2 key points. And the first one is that if you recognize that you have been receiving energy and value from a community, that's only possible because there are people who are active and energetic and positive in that community. And they're just people. I mean, we're all just people. We've got lives and jobs and families. And there's nothing particularly difficult or special about just being present and positive and energetic. Doesn't require any special skills or special interests. It's just be there and be positive, be energetic. And that's how we keep these communities alive and thriving. And then the second key point is inertia is the most powerful force in the universe. So if you can just start, it's amazing where you will end up. I tweeted about it because it kind of stunned me a bit to look back and be like, I have now written C code that is in, the SQLite 3 Ruby gem, one of the most popular gems, downloaded by most Rails applications. And I can definitively say I don't know C. You can't, give me a coding challenge and say, solve this challenge in C. But I learned enough that I could do this. And that's just inertia, right? That's just, you do things and it gets easier to do the next thing. It gets easier to do the next thing, and the next thing you're doing is bigger, and it snowballs. So really just start, find something. For me, it started off with an interest. It turned into a passion through the energy that I received back and the kindness that I received back. Old Mo, he was like, hey, you want to hop on? I was like, I want to understand your gem. Can we hop on a call and you just walk me through the source? He's like, sure, hop on a call. Mike, hopping on a call with me. These kinds of activities, this kind of presence and energy, drew me in, and now I'm just trying to give that back. And I hope that more and more people enter into that kind of way of thinking. Say, you know what? Just let me be present. Let me be positive. See where it goes.
That sounds great, man. It seems like he made you a believer from one phone call, one video call, and that's just great.
Yeah, I saw him at Rails World too, and I got to thank him and tell him, like, probably for you that was just like a random 30 minutes, but it was actually like really meaningful and valuable to me.
Nice.
And the way in which you sort of like didn't just treat it like, here's a bug report or something, like he was so present and positive, and it really it can have such a profound effect. Like these things that seem so small to us. That's why I really keep harping on it. Like presence and positivity are profoundly high leverage things, right? Like it's one of the things I like about this show, and I like about like the general branding, right? Like it's easy to underappreciate the value of friendliness, but it is like profoundly valuable and can really change the trajectory of people and their lives and communities. So friendly show for the win.
You're making us blush, man. How can we follow that? Thank you.
How can we make Steven blush?
Yes. Well, I have one more question. This is something that I can't remember who, but somebody told me, like, I think it was at Helvetic. They said, "Do you know there's this guy here? Stephen. He's working with Joel Draper, our new framework, which is totally out of this world. Like, I gotta find him and talk to him." And then, like, I knew you, and I said, "Okay, Stephen, tell me what the hell are you working with? Like, we wanna hear more."
The SQLite guy working with the
Flex.
Flex guy. SQ Flex.
Yeah. Maybe we should rename it to that. But yeah, it's an exciting project. It's also a daunting project. Right now we've given it a code name because code names are cool. So it has a code name Yippee. But yeah, Joel and I connected I don't know, a while back, and just have been chatting, and through chatting we came to recognize that we thought about web development really similarly, and we were both interested in one particular question, which is like, if you started a web application framework from first principles today, right? So like, for example, some of those principles would be NVMe drives are the default. So this is like the push of all of the solid gems, is this recognition that you're not going to a spinning disk. Like the difference between going to disk and going to RAM is not, 3 orders of magnitude in performance. That's one big difference. Like containerization is something that is fairly well established and understood. I don't understand it as well as I'd like, but most of the other smart people understand it. And so that's like, just as an example, some of the first principles, like some of the things, if you're just starting today, you would take for granted and sort of not have backwards compatibility to, like, does our framework work well if you have a server with a spinning disk? The other sort of main thought was, okay, we know it in our bones that you could build an incredibly large, performant, valuable, resilient web application purely through vertical scaling. Right? You could SQLite all the things. You could get massive, even just on AWS, you can rent like these absolutely massive machines. But, no one else will believe us until we can demonstrate it. So it's like, what is it going to take to be able to build like a truly world-class web application on a single machine? And just through chatting, we had some similar ideas around some principles and some technical decisions. And so we just started hacking to, like, What does the routing look like? What does the model layer look like? What do views look like? Hint, they're Flex.
Oh,
I was
Surprise,
expecting
surprise.
SQLite or something.
view component.
But the vision, and it's like constantly evolving for like, what exactly does a beta version of this look like? What gets in and what do you push off? But the vision is to present an alternative to Rails and to Hanami that tries to strike a distinctive third track where it has the articulation of Rails. So both of us find that like Hanami's a little bit too verbose, right? Like I don't like the pyramid of namespaces. You know, it's like you have to have 5 namespaces to do anything. And I just can't stand it. I'm too OCD for that. So it's Rails-like in that way, but it's Hanami-like in that it is aggressively trying to not do dark magic, right? Only light magic. We want 0 leaky abstractions. So we want something that is very expressive, very beautiful, and very easy to write, but the abstractions mathematically can't leak. This is one of the things I really like about Flex. It's incredibly expressive. It's elegant. It's beautiful. But the abstractions can't leak. There's a direct one-to-one mapping between elements, attributes, and children. And there's nothing else added, you know. So that is the Yippee project. We took a break over the holidays, and both took vacations and hung out with our families, but I'm actually getting on a call with him tomorrow, and we're getting back into it. We have like the core rudiments of routes and controllers and models and views, and we're just trying to figure out how much polish we want to add before we put something out there in beta form.
Nice. Sounds great. I really want to dig in and check out the beta, and I wish you guys luck because I know this isn't easy building up a new framework and trying to think of everything.
Yeah, it's tricky to like find that balance between like you want to do something world class and not have any issues, but you also try to like stop it. Like I have literally been meditating for months on how could you even just theoretically do 0 downtime migrations with SQLite. And I actually now have a plan, but it took me like just thinking about it for months. And then at the same time, trying to experiment with a declarative approach to migrations to say like, okay, what if you didn't write migrations? What if you just described your schema in your models? And if you make a change to the description of your schemas, we compute a delta and figure out how to get from state A to state B. And that led me into like, I have been battling with myself to convince myself to not write a Ruby parser that generates a Ruby AST of SQLite's SQL syntax, because ultimately that's what I would need to do what I want to do perfectly. But I'm also like, but that's going to take me a month, and I don't want to spend a month doing that. So how can I find a higher leverage choice? So yeah, it's daunting on a number of fronts, but it's also, I think in general, it's really valuable. I would recommend to people. I would not recommend try to build a new web application framework, but I would recommend like to really challenge your assumptions and to challenge your priors and to really consider like, I wonder if I could do this thing that on first blush seems to me either stupid or impossible, and just give yourself 30 minutes to really think about it and see, is it actually impossible? Is it actually stupid? I mean, this is sort of what ultimately landed me working with SQLite. Like everyone, I had read the internet. I have a sense people say, that's stupid. Don't do that. I spent a little bit of time and I thought about it. And I was like, well, it's not stupid for me, though.
Yep.
And I think that that's true of a lot of things. So take the opportunity to challenge convention.
That's just great advice, and I think it's a good motto on which we can close. Tell us, Stephen, where can people find you online?
Well, I am at Fractal Mind everywhere. I kind of got lucky and stumbled into good branding. So you can find me on Twitter. I'm most active on Twitter, but I'm also on the Ruby Social, Mastodon. Fractal Mind is my GitHub handle. I write mostly about SQLite-related Rails things, but also just other Rails things on my blog at fractalmind.github.io. And I say this every time I'm asked this question, and I really mean it, so I try to take a little bit of time to flesh it out. I received so much value from people in the community who are willing to take time to talk with me and answer my questions and consider the things that I was trying to do and think through it with me. Like, is this the right thing to do? Is there a better way to do it? And so I recognize that it is my responsibility to offer that back. And I take that very seriously. And I genuinely really enjoy it. So I know everyone says, like, please do reach out, but I really genuinely mean it. Please do reach out. I have a karmic debt to pay. You would be really helping me out. And plus, like, part of my passion is to find as many of the rough edges as I can and smooth them out. And I can only do so many different features in my SQLite apps. So if you have problems and you want to, or you're considering, is this even possible? Is this doable? Like, write me on Twitter, DM me, write me on Mastodon, what have you, open an issue in a pull request or in a repository. I am very much open and interested in having conversations with people and taking the opportunity to pay back my karmic debts.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining this evening, Stephen. We'll keep in touch on the channels on Twitter and hope to see you in the new events of 2024 and the conferences.
Yeah, thank you both for having me.
Okay, see ya. Bye.